Johar, everyone. Uh, Welcome, everyone. My name is Archana Soreng, and I'll be moderating this session on supporting and valuing the voice of Indigenous people, the role of youth at the IUCN Global Youth Summit. So, once again, I welcome you all. Before we get started with the session, I would like to share a few technical notes which will help you to join and participate in this session well. So, right in the bottom, you can see a sign of globe wherein you can go for the language interpretation. We have speakers who will be speaking in Spanish and English. So you can go to the transcription below and choose the language which you want to hear. And then you can also see that there is an option for closed captioning. So you can go there and click there and see the live transcript in the bottom. And yes, we are here for an intergenerational dialogue on supporting the and valuing the voice of Indigenous people, the role of youth. So we are very eager and looking forward to hear your comments, your message. So please feel free to drop in your text in the Zoom chats as we'll be reading your questions, we'll reading your remarks, and we'll be reading your perspective. So please feel free to engage in the Zoom chats. And I'm very, very happy to be here today at the Global Youth Summit of IUCN. And this is the first Global Youth Summit of IUCN, and we have had 13,000 people joining us over 170 countries. And I feel this is a very huge and important landmark which we have achieved in this virtual summit. And thereby, as we are talking about Indigenous people in the Global Youth Summit of IUCN, we have also seen the participation of Indigenous people and Indigenous youth across all the sessions. And across very special sessions which has been organized in terms of intergenerational dialogues, youth speak labs, and also the workshops. So super happy and super eager for this session as well, because it is an intergenerational dialogue, and I truly believe that it is through intergenerational dialogue that we'll be working towards climate action and conservation. Well, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Archana Soreng, and I belong to Kharia tribe, an indigenous community from India. And I have been engaged in research and advocacy in indigenous people's rights and climate justice. I have been also working on documentation, preservation, and promotion of the traditional knowledge and practices of the indigenous communities. So, today we are here for this intergenerational dialogue, and I would like to set the context for this intergenerational dialogue. The science says that 80% of world's biodiversity is on indigenous people's land and territories, which means that conservational plans needs to prioritize the engagement of indigenous people and ensure that their indigenous leadership is part of the decision making process. And today we are here with Indigenous leaders and Indigenous young people all across the world. And I'm very happy and super keen today to introduce our extremely inspiring panel of today's intergenerational dialogue. So, moving ahead to introducing our very inspiring and lot more knowledgeable and experienced speakers of today is first Georgie Carino, an Indigenous Ibaloi Kankane Igorot elder. She is an advocate for Indigenous peoples' human rights at community, national, and international levels. She is currently a senior policy advisor with Forest Peoples Forum. We welcome you, Georgie, for this intergenerational dialogue. We have Sefa Toli, an Indigenous Ibaloi Kankane Igorot youth from Codrila, Philippines, who is member of Global Youth of Biodiversity Network Steering Committee, representing Indigenous and local youth. We welcome you, Sefa, for this intergenerational dialogue. We have Kinan Tegar, an 16-year-old young man from Indonesia, an incredible filmmaker. Kinan was recipient of 2019 Equator Prize winner on behalf of his community, the Sungai Utik. So we welcome you, Kinan, for this intergenerational dialogue. We have Lisa Young, who is the executive director of Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources. We welcome you, Lisa, for this intergenerational dialogue. We have amongst us Lucas Quintapure, who is a Mapuche youth member of ICCA Consortium Council and has participated in all the regional assemblies of ICCA Consortium in Latin America and is a representative of Consortium in the international meeting such as Congress of Protected Areas of Latin America of the IUCN. We welcome you, Lucas, for this intergenerational dialogue. We have amongst us Alapaki Nahalea is Alapaki Nahalea is a Kamehameha School's Senior Director of Community Engagement and Resources for Hawaii Island. He was appointed by President Obama to serve on the Presidential Scholars Commission, where he helped to set commission policy and select top high school scholars from around the country. So here we have extremely distinguished and inspiring speakers of today. And I'm super, super excited for this intergenerational dialogue because I truly, truly believe that we have to learn from our elders, and intergenerational is the way ahead to go to achieve climate action and conservation. So, taking ahead this conversation of intergenerational dialogue, I strongly feel that our Indigenous leaders have immense of knowledge, wisdom, and experience, which we all need to listen, learn, and respect and adopt in our respective places. And today we have an extremely inspiring speaker with us, Georgie, an Indigenous leader. So I would like to pass on the conversation to Georgie, asking her what does she feels like, do we have made progress in including Indigenous leaders in conservation efforts? What are your thoughts, Georgie, on how much the Indigenous leaders have been involved or engaged in the conservation efforts? Georgie, would like to hear from you.
Thanks very much, Archana, and hello to everyone. Indigenous peoples from time immemorial and until today have been leaders in conservation. We know this, we have lived it, and now scientists are generating data and information supporting this lived experience. The question to be asked is, how far has conservation community moved towards alignment with the leadership role of Indigenous peoples and upholding a human rights-based approach to nature's conservation? We live in deeply unequal societies where economic and material values are paramount over cultural and nature's values. Seeking social justice and ecological balance are one and the same fight. I call on the conservation community to promote indigenous territories as a distinctive land category, delivering good biodiversity outcomes in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Strategy. Or will we continue in outmoded forms of fortress conservation? Indigenous territories, our cultures, alongside biodiversity, continue to be under threat from unsustainable development and inequitable conservation. Ethnocide and the loss of cultural and linguistic diversity can be as serious threats as biodiversity loss. Within our communities, another threat is cultural erosion and potential gaps between elder and younger generations. One of our urgent tasks is purposeful solidarity and transition between our linkage generations. And our dialogue today is one step in this journey. We are currently undergoing an intergenerational transition in leadership and responsibilities. Older generations wielding institutional and decision-making power are encountering the creative visions and the emergent willpower of younger generations. We together constitute the linkage generations, who together will shape nature's and culture's futures. I am looking to the indigenous youth to continue conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity on indigenous lands and waters, which underpin our collective well-being. This is our legacy and your birthright. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgie, for saying it loud and clear. It is our birthright and our legacy which we have received from our Indigenous elders. And we have to fight and we have to assert our rights over our territories and land. And I really like the point, the linkage and the participation is just one step. So, super happy and super inspired by this sharing of Georgie. And next, moving on to our next speaker, we have Shefa Tolly. And Shefa Tolly, I would like to ask her, Shefa, taking it ahead from Georgie, what do you think from an Indigenous youth leader? How much do you see efforts have been done in terms of engagement of Indigenous youth in the conservation efforts? And what are the enabling conditions which should be there for the Indigenous people, and how Indigenous people can support in the conservation? Sefa, would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Archana. Well, my first point is that to be clear and to really emphasize the first thing that Georgie mentioned, Indigenous peoples, including Indigenous youth, have always been actively involved in conservation in their communities as a way of life. More than being something that we do, conservation and sustainable use is the way that Indigenous peoples live, right? And this has not been fully recognized as it should. But I think what needs much more work and much more effort is involving Indigenous youth in decision-making spaces. And I cannot emphasize enough how much value and potential our voices can bring to these spaces as we confront a future that we will be living in, but also we're being guided by our Indigenous values that are that are that are kind to the earth and kind to each other, right? And I do hope and think that there has been some progress in terms of others seeing this value of Indigenous voices. And this is not only seen in formal negotiations, but also really in movements outside of formal processes. Um, I think this is being valued in young people's collective actions, like in climate movements and in movements against extractives, for example. But I think there's still a lot to be done because the mechanisms to participate are still not accessible enough for Indigenous peoples, and they're not accessible enough for young people, and especially so for the intersections between these two marginalized groups. And so to name maybe some enabling conditions for Indigenous peoples to continue this key role in leading conservation, one important one is really for us to be able to continue to live on our lands and practice our traditional practices, which are rooted in these lands. An important part of this is ensuring that our rights to lands and territories and resources are being respected and recognized. And we need to be able to do this without the threat of eviction or of harassment, of criminalization, and or even being killed, right? Another enabling condition is for spaces to be open at the table, for us to voice our views, and for there to be active support for this to happen. And just as a last point, um, we need to see that our voices are being taken into account in the decisions that are being made that matches the level um, of the fundamental role that we play. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sefa. That was amazing intervention and sharing, because I truly agree and believe with you that it is we Indigenous youth who should be part of the decision making process of the climate movement as well as the conservation movement. And at the same time, you rightly mentioned that how important it is to make accessible participation, because I strongly feel that people often say, we should ensure participation, but how do we make it? That accessibility is a very important, which you rightly emphasized, and along with that also emphasizing how important it is the recognition of rights to access this participation and also enabling condition for participation. Thank you so much, Sefa, for your sharing. So moving on, I would like to bring in Kainan Tegar, and I would like to ask Kainan, Kainan, we would like to hear from you. How does making documentary films connect you with the leaders of your community? And how does this impact you personally? And how would you wish that it impacts the world outside your community?
Thank you, Arta, for the question. Um, I think that in Indigenous communities, the elders have always been the most integral part of it. They are the ones that hold the knowledge. They are the ones that, for example, practice the rituals and such. And as youths, we have so much to learn from that, and that's what I wish to convey through my films, I guess, to tell the people in my community and also outside of it of how important it is for us to preserve our culture. For example, my community of Sungai Utik, we have protected our forests for hundreds of years, and in the illegal logging boom around 1970, 1980s, so many so many communities around us and throughout the island of Borneo at that suffered from it, I guess you could say. And now many of it is left. Many of those communities are left with not much choice to stay in the village because of lack of resources, and I guess you could say a lack of future that can be set in the communities. And what we need to do now is to, as Sefa said before, to secure the rights of indigenous people, because by securing our rights to not only our land, but to our identity. I I think that's the most important thing, because with that, then we can secure our future, I guess. And one of the best ways to do that is to learn from the elders, to practice what they have also practiced for however long they have lived, however long our culture has lasted. And I think one good way to think of it is to think of the elders as the pillars for our culture, and that the youth now, they are the future, we are the future. And to secure that, we need to recognize the importance. And I don't think I need to emphasize this more, as many of you have already said before, but Indigenous people are at the forefront of battling climate change and such. But not only that, but our rights as humans are sometimes still being violated to this day. And I think sorry, I'm a bit lost for words. I think it's just very important to recognize that, of course, because structural change is important, what you all have been doing, but change at the structure, at the ground level, communities to communities, is also much important. And from my films, I hope to show that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanan. That was a very inspiring sharing, and also making us realize that, we are here and sharing about our identity. It is our identity which binds us. And it is our identity which has binded us with our nature. And like, I would like to share this. My name is Archana Soreng. So the surname of my name is Soreng. And in my Khadiya language, the meaning of the surname means rock. So again, we have multiple indigenous communities whose surname is Kiro, which is in my language, it is tiger. There is surname called Kullu, which means tortoise. So the reason of sharing all this is the element of nature is embedded in our name and in our identity. And as you rightly said, it is our identity which has connected us with nature. And that is what we have been striving to protect nature. And as you rightly said, that, how important it is, the tool of filmmaking, and also emphasizing on that, how the past atrocity and imposition of the developmental paradigm has also led to indigenous youth going out of their place because the land is lack of resources at this moment. And that is where we also need to revive that, and we need to rejuvenate our traditional knowledge and practices. And that is where we are talking about green recovery, or COVID-19 recovery efforts. When we are talking about it, is this, we have to support the livelihood initiatives of indigenous people and local communities. So moving ahead for this interesting session, I'm like super happy by the diverse conversation and the amount of sharing which is coming in. So going ahead, I would like to bring in Lucas. And Lucas, we would like to hear from you. How did you come to work with Council of Elders from such a young age? And how has it helped your role outside your communities?
Bien. Muchas gracias. Siempre es muy gratificante escuchar a otros jóvenes del mundo. Y como decía Kinan, el trabajo con los mayores es fundamental, entendiendo que los mayores son los que tienen la memoria histórica desde tiempos inmemoriales. Nuestros pueblos indígenas, o en el caso del pueblo mapuche, al cual pertenezco, no hemos tenido una escritura propia. Toda nuestra historia, toda nuestra vida se transmite en la oralidad. Entonces es muy importante poder escuchar y transmitir lo ocurrido en nuestro pueblo para generar conciencia dentro de nuestras comunidades y en el ámbito que nos toca, hoy trabajando también con el Consejo de Sabios del Consorcio. Hay una palabra en nuestro pueblo que se llama feyentún. El feyentún básicamente es traer lo sucedido en el pasado al presente para poder afianzar identidad. Eso es lo que nuestros mayores siempre nos transmiten, siempre nos enseñan, y lo que siempre nos han transmitido los mayores de nuestro pueblo y otros mayores de otros pueblos indígenas, es que justamente somos los defensores milenarios de los territorios. Por eso al principio, cuando se dice qué podemos aportar las comunidades para la conservación, ¿no? O el mundo de la conservación. Y en realidad creo que es al revés. ¿Qué tiene que aprender el mundo de la conservación de los pueblos indígenas para poder realmente tener políticas que apoyen tanto a los territorios como a los pueblos, ¿no? Y a mí me sorprendía mucho, Soren, tu apellido, que tiene que ver con las energías que hay en el territorio. Mi apellido también significa relacionado con la naturaleza, y estamos al otro lado del mundo, y estamos con los mismos pensamientos, tratando de recuperar la identidad y escuchar a nuestros mayores. Creo que nuestra espiritualidad es lo que debemos recuperar como pueblos para poder seguir haciendo defensa de los territorios milenarios. Nosotros siempre nos gusta decir que el territorio es el fundamento de nuestra cultura, ¿sí? Sin el territorio no tenemos absolutamente nada. Y para finalizar, me gustaría contarles una breve parte de lo que es nuestra creencia como pueblo. Aquí tengo un instrumento, ¿sí?, que se llama cultrún. Nosotros, cada vez que hacemos una rogativa, cada vez que hacemos una ceremonia, llamamos a las energías de todo el territorio. La energía del agua, de la tierra, de los bosques, de los animales y de las plantas medicinales. Y cada vez que lo hacemos, lo llamamos a estas energías en 4 formas. Una tiene que ver con el hombre anciano, el hombre joven, la mujer anciana y la mujer joven. Estos 4 elementos son los que nos dan vida. Por eso es muy importante la parte anciana conectado con la parte joven, y la dualidad entre el hombre y la mujer. En mi idioma, cuando llamamos al lago, decimos Lafken Kushe, Lafken Fucha, Lafken Uchamu, Lafken Wechewentru. Con la montaña decimos Mawisa Kuse, Mawisa Ucha, Mawisa Uchamu, Mawisa Wechewentru. Entonces queremos que nos acompañen esas energías. Y creo que el mundo de la conservación tiene que aprender que para nosotros todo tiene vida. Las piedras tienen vida, el agua tiene vida, y eso es lo que tenemos que transmitir, y es lo que nos transmiten nuestros mayores, y por eso es muy importante siempre escucharlos, reflexionar y transmitirlo a las nuevas generaciones también. Espero haber sido claro, y bueno, de mi parte, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Lucas. That was amazing sharing. And it was so deep, so deep. I was like really very happy for sharing this to the entire world and all of the participants who are sharing this. because I think it is truly, truly important to share this perspective, because you know how spiritual energy is so important for us Indigenous people across, and how we seek nature's guidance and presence for all our activities and for our being itself. And I just felt connected that, you know, no matter we are in a different geographical location, but what binds us today is our struggle, is our identity, and is our connection with nature. We all do come from different tribes, but what connects us is our relationship with nature. And I'm super, super proud and happy to be in this extremely, extremely inspiring panel. And thank you so much for sharing, that how Indigenous women and what you showed and explained, that was really, really, really so, so inspiring. So I'm just, you know, I feel so emotional and happy and motivated, because this kind of conversation is so important, wherein we Indigenous elders and young people meet, interact, and talk about how we are taking this movement of climate action and conservation ahead. So, moving on to the next speaker, I would like to bring in Alapaki Nahalea, and I would like to ask him that, Alapaki, how do you draw on tradition while embracing an institutional space in order to support young people in Hawaii?
Well, aloha. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm so honored and inspired by the stories and sharing of my fellow panelists. Um, and I appreciate the question because it acknowledges some of the challenge of trying to work within the institutions that hold and manage the resources and decision-making that we need to live as Indigenous people. This is a personal question for me because when I wake up each morning, there is no place. I wake up in my homeland with no place to live these values. Although I can practice them individually or in our family, the overarching system that governs us is hostile to those values. And so I've spent my life having to work within the institutions that govern, manage, and often oppress us, to continue the long fight of my ancestors to seize back the ability to live in a society governed by these values. And I'm tired, but hearing the stories of my panelists this morning give me hope. I'm gonna break my response down to the three sections of the question. The first is, how do you draw on tradition? And my response is, you can't just draw on tradition. It must be your foundation. It must be constant, not something that you turn to. For me, that involves remembering my personal relationship with the environment and to treat them as a who, not a what, that they are my family. I know my mountain, my river, my access to the ocean. I speak with my ancestors on a daily basis, those that are here and those that are not here, for guidance and inspiration. And I know that in challenging times that they stand with me, that I'm not alone. Because working in institutions often is a lonely experience if you're Indigenous. And finally, for this section, I try very hard to align to the natural rhythms of the environment that I can rely on Each morning, I will reconnect with the moon phase that is happening that day, and reconnect the wisdom of my ancestors on what that means. If it's a good day to start something, if it's a day for rest, or if it's a day to challenge. And finally, for this section about tradition, is I've had to learn not to judge myself for the lack of knowledge that I have that was taken from me, and not to judge others, and to believe that we have that tradition in our DNA to be called on. The second part of the question is embracing institutional space. And I guess my answer, I'm kind of a troublemaker, so my answer is don't embrace institutional space. The premise of the question is that we have to draw on tradition in these spaces because we acknowledge that they are not friendly to Indigenous worldview. And if you have earned the opportunity to have influence in those institutional spaces, you don't embrace it, you challenge it, you wrestle with it, you disrupt it. Because if you grow up in and make a living off of being in those institutional spaces, sometimes you can lose your connection back to Indigenous way of thinking and being. And so you have to embrace the opportunity to advance Indigenous view in those spaces. And as I mentioned earlier, to elevate the conversation in institutional space above access and giving opportunity to giving true control of decision-making resources. And finally, for this section, again, I think we need to not judge those who are fighting for Indigenous worldview in our institutions and those fighting for Indigenous view out of our institutions. That the oppressive systems often pit us against each other, when the reality is we need that fight in both places, in and out of these institutions. And then finally, the most important part of the question for me is, in order to support young people. Again, I'm just so inspired by the voices of my fellow panelists. And if you don't know, it's 3 in the morning in Hawaii where I'm at. And one of the things you do to support young people is you show up for them. And I probably would not have agreed to do this panel if it wasn't for a young person I work with who's on the call, Somerset Yamamoto, who suggested this would be a good idea. And I'm so glad she did. There's such wisdom in the exuberance of youth and the excitement of youth. So one way you support young people is by showing up when they ask. Another way is that you understand your place in history. So for me, I do think of it as 7 generations, and I'm not, I think too many people want to be the hero in the story versus just play their role. So there's I think 3 generations before me and all the sacrifices they made so that I'd have the opportunity to play the role that I now have. And I try to think, well, what is my role for the next 3 generations? That helps bring your ego down a bit, that we're not gonna recover all that was taken from us in 1 generation, but it also makes the load lighter because we can work collaboratively. And then finally, it's very important that we give youth opportunity to lead sooner than later. Although I really respect, Keenan's point about elders being pillars in community, and I agree with that. I worry in my own community that we want to hold on to control for too long, and that the sooner we can give youth practice being the leader, the Indigenous leaders, we need them to be the better. So in closing, I just want to reemphasize that the Indigenous worldview has a right to exist, not only in theory or in books or in conversations, but as a governing value set to create communities that will thrive in those values. I don't want to just decolonize, I want to indigenize our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alepaki. It was so important sharing from your end, because I could relate, being accessing education from the formal education systems and institution, how difficult it is, and what imposition of education is all across there, and how difficult it is while going up in terms of accessing education. And rightly said that it has to be the indigenous worldview which is core, and respecting indigenous people's worldview will be core to attain the sustainable development goals, climate action, and all the conservation efforts. And I really liked what you said. It's not decolonize the perspective, rather indigenize the perspective, because that is what we really strive for. And the connection which you shared about perspective and overarching and dominance of the extractive worldview or the developmental paradigm which has been going and putting down and down to us. And I extremely like how you said it's a process and it will take us years to undo it, but we have to keep the battle on and we have to keep striving for it. And we, both the indigenous elders and young people, will be striving and pushing forward, sharing the world about our perspective, because our worldview is very important and special for the conservation. So moving ahead, thank you so much for your sharing. I would like to bring in Lisa now. And Lisa, we would like to hear from you as to that how the Nikani Otwican Youth Training Program is supporting and amplifying the voice of young people in your community.
Yes, thank you. So the Niganiotigan program is a week-long summer camp for Mi'kmaq youth. And originally the intent was to have Mi'kmaq youth be able to explore different career paths in resource management. So there was many parts of the camp where we bring in people from different departments and different organizations that practice resource management, and discuss with them the opportunities and give them hands-on learning experiences. So an opportunity again to explore career options. And then we also have our own staff from our organization, UINR, both biologists and guardians, Indigenous Mi'kmaq biologists and guardians, talk about how the Mi'kmaq and what we're doing to try to advance Indigenous-led conservation and management in Nova Scotia. The approach that we take is a two-eyed seeing approach. It's a concept that was brought forward by Elder Albert Marshall, and to what a lot of people are saying, it's in his mind, what we can do as Indigenous people is take from one eye the best that Western science has brought, but apply it through an Indigenous worldview, with seeing through the other eye, with all those things that we spoke of by Indigenous knowledge and values. So using the best of both to advance conservation. And another part of the camp, because of that, we really need to strengthen that Indigenous knowledge system, that Indigenous eye, especially within our communities. So revitalization of the Mi'kmaq perspective on sustainability and concepts like Nadugalim are a really important part of the camp. So throughout the whole camp, we have our elders and our knowledge holders work with the youth and teach them about traditional perspectives of sustainability and land relationship, and most importantly, responsibility, because that's the core of our relationship to the land, is that we say that in Mi'kma'ki, we say we have rights to be on the land and practice our culture, but with that also comes a great responsibility to the land and to protect and preserve that land. So that's a very integral part of the work that we do. Everything is the core of it is that concept of Netaglimp, and that's where we work from. So as everyone else is relaying, there's a growing interest in Canada and the world really for having Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous people kind of lead us on a better path for conservation towards a more sustainable future. And our Indigenous youth are the people that we are going to have expect to lead this way. As you said, the Indigenous youth are going to be leading this. And this is a lot of responsibility that we're passing on to our youth. My husband is a cultural support worker for our communities in the mental health and wellness team. And his colleague is a registered psychotherapist. And he often refers to the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, or ACEs. And basically what that study suggests is that the rougher your childhood, the higher your score is likely to be. So you have a higher risk for health problems, both physically and mentally. And the high score being a 10. And it takes into account all those things of abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. And I bring this up because I want to just illustrate the importance of programs like Nigini Outdiggin, because our Indigenous youth, especially in our communities here in Nova Scotia, are born into a world of systemic racism and intergenerational trauma. He estimates that at their birth, just at being born, they're already at a level 3 or 4. And so when I think about our youth, and that burden that we have, that we expect them as leaders in the future of not only healing our communities from these effects of colonialism, and but also to heal the land as well. But I am hopeful because of programs in our communities like Nigini Outdiggin. I see the strength and resilience that our youth have. And programs like these are very important. And I just want to share, because I want to use their own words to show the importance of programs like Nigini Outdiggin, and what they share when we ask them the effect that these camps have on their lives. So they've said, I love hearing our elders' stories. I like connecting with new people and reconnecting with nature and our traditions. I felt a bit disconnected from my culture, but this camp helped me gain knowledge about the things I had no idea about, such precious and valuable knowledge, and I will do my best to hold on to it and to add to it to years to come. My culture is an important part of who I am. This camp helped me to nourish this part of myself in a way that I feel confident to learn about anything and work in any career. My cultural identity is very important to me. Our culture is strong and amazing. This camp gives us an opportunity to reconnect with our culture, our spirituality, and nature. I feel like my spirit is healthier because of this camp. The sweat lodge, the hikes, the stories that people shared have made me a stronger person. I feel inspired to continue learning more about my culture, and maybe someday I will be teaching you. So all this to say is we are asking a lot of our youth, but our Indigenous youth are so strong and they're so resilient because they had to be. And it's this strength and the resilience that they have, coupled with this strong and amazing culture that we have, that is going to make them such amazing leaders and give them the ability and to lead everyone down this difficult path that we've asked them to lead us, of restoring our culture and curing our communities, but also healing the land. So I'm just very thankful for our strong youth here today, and they're very amazing examples of the strength and resiliency that our communities have. So.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing those important and most valuable words. It's so emotional to hear this. And also, I what I feel is so rightly emphasized about systematic racism and also the trauma which we have since birth, which is often not acknowledged from the beginning. And there's lots of demanding which is there from the youth. But I think again, this conversation like this motivates us to go beyond what we have faced and strive for our climate and also for the nature and also for the world, and also shows how resilient we are, as you rightly said. And I'm just so happy to be in this panel. Uh, Super happy to be in this panel because this has been so empowering interaction. So I'm so happy to have you all here in this conversation. And going ahead, we have few questions from our participants, and we have 7 minutes to wrap up. So I would like to share the questions, and I would like you all to request you all to share your thoughts. And 1 minute each for your intervention, so we can sum up and share a perspective of whatever the questions has been asked. So I'll just ask those questions to our speakers. So one of the question which has been asked by Rachel Bonomo is that how can Indigenous youth working for non-Indigenous organization or institution promote and support change from within? And also, what advice would we give to communities and organizers who are intimidated and threatened to give their free, prior, and informed consent to utilize their lands? So, this is the two questions which we have received from our panelists, from our participants, and I request you all the panelists to share your thoughts. I know we are running out of time, so if you could share 1 minute intervention of what is your thought to this question. And I would like to share that this is the last round of sharing, and then we'll be wrapping up this conversation. So this is the last thoughts time for all of us. So please feel to share your thoughts. So we would go with Sefa.
Okay, I'll give it a try. So maybe to answer the first question about being an Indigenous person in a non-Indigenous NGO, for example, I think it's really important that to just remember that our voice, it matters, and that we shouldn't be afraid to share it. I think sometimes I find myself unconsciously tempering the indigeneity, because sometimes it I don't know, I have a feeling that people listen to me less, but I'm going to check myself and not do that, because our identities as Indigenous peoples brings us a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge that adds value to spaces where we are, whether or not they are within our own communities or outside.
Thank you so much,
May I?
Sefa. Anyone else who would like to go next?
Can I?
Yes, Canon.
Okay. So for the second question, in Indonesia specifically, I've seen a lot of communities and who have lost or who never had their free, prior, informed consent beforehand, and one of the most important ways that we can help against that, to combat against that, I suppose, is to help inform them of it. For example, from one of my films tells the story of my community and how how they had been fighting for their rights and finally winning their land rights. And with that land rights, they are now responsible for their lands, managing it using their traditional way of life. And I think the most important thing then to answer that question is to inform more communities to make them aware of the importance of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Canon. Anyone else who would like to go next?
I'd like to follow up on free prior informed consent. That is a very important right, an extension of our right to self-determination, but it is also a middle space where when we meet with government agencies, corporations, and others, researchers, here is where we actually enter into a deep dialogue into what are the conditions that will create a good partnership. Because if these good conditions of respect and mutuality are not reached, then we have the right also to say no. But in that space, let us strive to create increased understanding of our rights, our perspectives, and worldviews, because this will actually contribute to better outcomes for all of those we enter into partnerships with.
Thank you so much, Georgie. Lisa?
Yes, no, I agree. When we talk about traditional knowledge and perspectives, sometimes we don't even like to say traditional, because some people from the Western world would think of it, it means that it's old, it's past, but it's very much the indigenous knowledge systems and ways of knowing, and it's much more relevant today than it ever has ever been. And they're all values and belief systems that you can apply today. So it's not even it's something that you should always push in your organizations and try to make space for and feel very confident in voicing, because I think that's what we need to transition the world to a more sustainable future for our youth. And I think it's more important, and they should be very empowered to share that always.
Alora Chan, if I could weigh in to the part of the question that's about being lonely and being inside of a space that's not indigenous. And my own experience and suggestion is that's why I reference being a practitioner, so that you have a solid foundation of practice, of indigenous practice in your personal life. Because I think that gives you the fortitude to recognize some of the colonial behavior inside those systems. When you're immersed in it, it starts to, things get to be clouded, reality becomes clouded. So you don't have to, your indigenous practice doesn't have to be on the outside when you're in these institutions, but they need to be on the inside. And that way you can pick and choose the moments and opportunities to stand up, and the moment and opportunities to, I'm not gonna fight this battle. And the last thing I'll say about that is know that if you are a warrior for indigenous worldview in an institution, that is part of the work. Knowing when to push and when not to push is a way to be a warrior for this worldview, and embrace and be empowered by that role and how important it is.
Yes. Lucas, would you like to share? Quickly, as
Sí, gracias. Yo creo que lo fundamental dentro de las instituciones que nos acompañan a los pueblos indígenas es poder visibilizar la lucha que tiene cada uno, poder visibilizar los derechos que tenemos como pueblo, esos derechos actuales y derechos ancestrales. Y en estos derechos ancestrales, el derecho a la identidad es sumamente fundamental. Siempre me gusta recalcar que cuando nosotros perdemos la identidad y perdemos la cosmovisión de nuestros pueblos, desaparecemos como pueblo. Entonces creo que una de las grandes luchas es poder mantener y poder vigilar tanto a los estados, a los parques nacionales, a las reservas nacionales, para que nosotros como pueblo sigamos teniendo la misma vida, la misma cosmovisión. Y siempre lo recalco y me gusta decirlo, cada oportunidad que tengo, y es que las iglesias y los centros católicos es una de las principales organizaciones que hacen que nuestros pueblos pierdan nuestra propia cosmovisión. Por eso yo siempre pido que no intervengan dentro de nuestros territorios, que las iglesias no intervengan dentro de nuestros pueblos, porque esa ha sido una de las causas principales de la pérdida de la defensa del territorio. Si perdemos nuestra cosmovisión, perdemos el sentido de lucha de los territorios. Y creo que las organizaciones nos tienen que ayudar en ese sentido, a permanecer como pueblo. Eso, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for this lovely interaction, intergenerational dialogue which we had. It was so immense, inspiring, and learning. So now I would request everyone to please stay on. We are having another lot of inspiring speakers tonight. So I request you all to stay on, and we will be soon having a next set of speakers for the day. And I would like to thank all the speakers for the group one. Alapaki, Lisa, Jyoti, Kinan, Lucas, Sefa, thank you so much for your giving time. And I truly appreciate, Alapaki, that, it's 3 a.m. at Hawaii. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are tuning on to our next group for the discussion. So please be ready. We'll be having another set of inspiring speakers. And until our next speakers join in, I would like to share a few of my reflection of the first round of discussion which we had. Is like it was a wide range of sharing, from talking about rights recognition of the indigenous people over the land and territories, to indigenous worldview, to indigenous peoples documentation and preservation of the indigenous culture, to racism and systematic racism, and also talking about participation. So I think it was an all in all package where we spoke about how supporting and valuing the indigenous community, especially the youth, was spoken in our first group one. And I think it was a terrific conversation and inspiring learning from all. So I see our speakers are joining, and we are really super excited for this group two interaction, which we'll be having now. So for all those participants, those who have joined now, I welcome you all once again to Global Youth Summit of IUCN. And today we are here having an intergenerational dialogue on valuing the indigenous peoples, traditional knowledge and practices, and interaction with the indigenous youth and different stakeholders. So moving on to introduce our next set of speakers for tonight. So first we have Kuana Chazing-Posh. Kuana is an active in climate action movement. She's a model and she's a youth leader in protecting Arctic wildlife. Kuana, we welcome you for this intergenerational dialogue. And the second speaker for tonight is my dear friend, Niria, who is such an inspiration. Personally, I inspire from her. Niria Garcia is a young champion of the Earth 2020 winner. We welcome you, Niria. We have the next speaker, who is Mali Ole Kanunga, Executive Director of Impact, Indigenous Movement for Peace, Advancement, and Conflict Transformation, an organization that exists to organize, build, and strengthen Indigenous peoples' social movements at grassroots in northern Kenya. We have our fourth speaker, who is Ramiro Butsin George, and he is from IUCN. We have Kristen Walker, and she is the chair of CEESP. So we welcome Ramiro and Kristen for this intergenerational dialogue. We have Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who is the current CEO of GEF and former Minister of Energy and Environment for Costa Rica. Carlos, we welcome you for this intergenerational dialogue. So all the participants, we have amazing, inspiring speakers for tonight, and I'm super looking forward for the sharing of the session. So moving on to our first round of sharing, which we'll be having as of now. So I would like to ask the question to all the speakers about what are the tools to amplify Indigenous voices. And in one word, we would like to hear from all the speakers, what do you think are the specific tools or resources needed to support and empower the Indigenous young leaders? So moving on to Kuana, what is that one word which you feel is very important to ensure participation and empowerment of Indigenous young people?
Good morning, everyone. It's morning for me, very early. So thank you for having me. Yeah, my answer to your question, when I've spoken with a lot of empowering, amazing people, including who I'm sitting here speaking with right now. And one thing that I've learned that a lot of people ask is that question, what are the tools? How can we help? How can we amplify these young voices and people that are out here doing hard work out on the front lines? And usually for me personally, it's really just giving someone space and room to share their stories and voices, because a big part of my advocacy work, and I feel like everyone else can relate to this in some way, is storytelling.
So thank you, Kuana. So it is giving space to people and allowing to share their voice. So it's sharing and speaking up. Kristen, what is that one word which you feel is the technique and resources to amplify the voices of Indigenous youth?
I think it's really being open to listen. Maybe just echoing a little bit, it's being open to listen and to learn. As an elder or older person in this process, I think there's always new solutions, and we need to understand the pathway that we need to move forward on for the next generation.
Thank you so much. So Kuana opening spaces and allowing spaces, and Kristen talking about listening to those voices and accepting to those voices. So going to Niria, what is that one word or technique which you would like to share about empowering Indigenous youth?
Thank you for having me. Tlasokamati Kwalitonali to all of you. Good day. I think that one word and you'll have to excuse me because I'm in the airport. I think that one word is humility and love, because when we approach this work with humility, we recognize that we need everybody. We need everybody from our children to our elders working together, because we all have different perspectives and different knowledge to contribute to the solutions that are so necessary in this time. Thank you.
Amazing. So it is accessing space, open to listening, and humility and love. So next to Carlos, what do you think is the one word which should be the tool and technique for enabling and supporting the Indigenous youth?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. My message is we need to dream big and understand that we cannot change the system if we don't get into the system. I remember my youth years participating in the Rio Summit. I never expected to be Minister of Environment of Costa Rica, my country. I never expected in my wildest dream to be at the head of the GF, but I understood that I needed to deal with the system I want to change. And I began engaging into the system and trying from the inside out change the system. So we need to dream big and we need to focus our long-term vision.
Let's dream big and focus on long-term vision. So moving on to Mr. Ramiro, what is that one word which you would say in terms of the technique and resources to empower the Indigenous youth?
Sí, y yo creo que es fundamental, digamos, en estos momentos y más en una plataforma donde están reunidos los jóvenes, es que podamos ver el pasado, ver el presente y ver el futuro. Palabras claves es fortalecer los conocimientos tradicionales y unir la tecnología moderna, porque tiene que haber esos dos mundos. Tenemos que ver hacia atrás, donde está todo ese bagaje, ese conocimiento tradicional que es base para salvar el planeta, pero también tenemos un mundo, tenemos un futuro en el cual ustedes navegan fácilmente en el internet, las computadoras, en los teléfonos. Si nosotros podemos tomar todo lo positivo de la tecnología, integrar nuestros conocimientos y sabiduría dentro de eso, ustedes están forjando su futuro y están dejándole a los niños y a las futuras generaciones un mundo sano. Gracias.
Thank you. Mali, what do you think that is one word which is the technique or resources to empower Indigenous people? How would you like to summarize that?
Thank you, everyone, and it's great being here. I think for me, the key word here is capacity. The capacity. I think the youth have a lot of latent energy, and I think they can their capacity to engage, the leadership capacity to be viewed as emerging leaders. So to me, I think it's very important, so that they can effectively participate and engage in a very informed manner.
Thank you. That was really lovely hearing you all about what is that technique and resources. So I would like to share with all of our participants that you'll be getting a link of menti.com where you can participate in wherever you are across the globe, and you can also share what is that one word or one resources which you feel should be is needed to empower the young people, and then later on we'll see that how and what is the perspective of all our participants. So here is the link in the chat box. Please log in and put the code, and we are looking forward to your answers. So moving ahead for today's discussion, I would like to bring in Mali and would like to hear first from Mali is, in your experience, building unity among diverse group, what can we draw from that, and how we can ensure that young people are able to access these diverse spaces?
Thank you very much. I'm really happy and great to be here to share my experience in terms of strengthening intergenerational kind of enabling youth to participate. So the first thing I'm just drawing from the math side is, first of all, I think each and every generation, we have to admit that there are intergenerational obligations. Each generation has that responsibility, the obligation to transfer skills, knowledge to the next. It has the responsibility to ensure the integrity of the ecosystem, the integrity of the territories of the earth. So, how do you do this? We do this by ensuring that interaction of different age groups. Among the Maasai, we have age set leadership. And every 10 years, about 7 to 10 years, there emerges a new leadership, young leaders. Like right now, we have a lot of emerging young leaders who take the mantle. And the youngest age set right now are supposed to be our sons, and they get a name, they get a blessings, and they also get to learn. It's a huge camp that has up to about 1,000 or more young people, and then there's an elders who come bless them, but also that's where they receive their obligations of what they have to ensure. They will have to be responsible for the next up to another 10 years before another age set really happens. So what happens here? How can these two different or diverse kind of categories of the same community meet? There are a number of spaces through rituals and songs. They meet through spiritual ceremony. This is where the interaction is going on. But in terms of the interaction, the hybrid system of the tradition and the modern, indigenous and modernity, it's a challenge because we have modern education. We take children away to boarding schools. And then we have this, we have the traditional institutions of customary governance, which really runs independently with the elders. So right now, what's happening? Every holiday, school holidays, is a mix of where those who have been to school, those who are in a traditional system, come together, and then they are going to go through another traditional education to ensure that that's the interactive space between the elders, because those who have been to formal education, but those who are sustaining the system of the livelihood by ensuring that they take care of the earth, they take care of the livestock. The Maasai interact with nature, and they say the land is the heart of the Maasai, and the cow is the soul. So everything that they do must respect the land, that is the territory. The territory has their own resources, but also they must respect the cow. The cow is an identity because it provides their food system is that, and the youth has to undertake to learn how to manage that. So for us, it's about that ensuring to continuously ensure that there's interaction in terms of leadership camps, in terms of ceremonies, participative ceremonies, to ensure that every now and then when there are traditional ceremonies happening, you must have an obligation to attend. So these are some of the things that we ensure to ensure that relationship happens. Because the future and sustainability is the youth. It's the identity of a community is the youth, because they are the ones who have the obligations to carry that identity forward and link and know what it means really to operate in a kind of biocultural landscape where the Maasai will undertake their livelihood and also identify with it. So thank you so much. I hope I've been able to respond to your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mali, for your sharing about, how important it is to ensure that combination and balance of indigeneity, indigenous, and also the modernity. And as you rightly emphasize, how important it is that the recognition of land right is the core in terms of empowering the indigenous people. And yes, because I strongly feel with my research here, I feel that when there is non recognition of rights of the indigenous people, it often leads to land grab, it often leads to migration and displacement, which again breaks the channel of traditional knowledge from the elders to the younger generation, which in a way affects the capacity and the leadership quality to engage in the climate action discourse or the conservation efforts. So, very rightly and importantly shared by Mali. Thank you so much, Mali, for your very inspiring sharing. So I'm bringing in Kuana now, and I would like to hear from Kuana, being herself representing in a lot of mainstream spaces and without losing her identity and with powerfully representing the indigenous youth and effective leadership which she has shown over the years. So Kuana, what is your experience and what would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, thank you. Um, Having a platform can be very hard sometimes because you have a lot of eyes on you, but you're able to share so much with people and you're able to educate and, meet people that you never thought you would meet through social media. And I thought it was amazing because I have had amazing interactions with people all over the world. And you know keeping my identity as an indigenous person while having a platform, while I can feel very alone at times, I can feel disconnected, I can feel anxious, and I suffer greatly with anxiety and depression. And so getting back onto the lands and reconnecting with my ancestors, with the lands, because like what was said before, um, we treat the lands as our family. They are our family and they are our ancestors. And so, my family and I grew up really closely to the lands and my way of life. I grew up hunting, fishing, and learning my values, and really taking on the responsibility as an Indigenous woman coming into advocacy work. And sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself, and that's when I have to take a step back and, reconnect, because it can be very draining. And then you kind of forget who you are after a while because you're constantly working and constantly educating and giving so much out to people, and you forget to take care of yourself. And so it's really important to take a step back and take care of yourself while doing this work. It's very exhausting and can be mentally draining and emotionally draining, because as Indigenous people, we have these connections to the lands, the animals, and our waters. And when I talk about, here in Alaska, and, people on this call, you guys, amazing people from all over the world, different Indigenous communities, we can all relate in a similar way when we talk about our values, when we talk about, advocacy work, because we all, have so much compassion for those who don't understand, but we really put ourselves on the line to make sure that people, are starting to be educated on these things. And so, the power of representation and leadership that I have gained through the work, and especially signing with a modeling agency, it can be overwhelming. And so, the power of representation is so big to me. And that's why I do what I do, and make sure that people know that we're still here. And then I'm able to uplift other youth voices and share my stories as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kuana. That was really, really very inspiring. And we are really proud of you and best wishes for whatever you are doing because you are inspiring each one of us across the world. And as you rightly said, I really liked what you said. The land is a family. A land is our ancestor. And you also rightly emphasized, which, we being part of the youth movement, there is lots of draining because we give a lot, and also it is important to step back to reconnect, and I completely echo with what you said. So thank you, Kuana, for joining us and sharing such inspiring words. So I would like to move on to Niria and would like to hear from Niria. Niria, you have been working on various dynamic spaces. You are organizing and working to strengthen the indigenous voices. So what do you think should be the efforts or the bridge taken to ensure that the indigenous voices are more amplified?
Thank you again so much. And I apologize for the back noise. I'm like in the airplane now and there's a crying child, but we do this work for the next 7 generations. So, God bless this child. I think what is really important for us to remember as we struggle together, is that healing work is so central to the liberation of Indigenous people and all peoples, because in the States right now, we see there's a lot of like lateral violence that happens amongst our own communities that is rooted in the deep wounds we have from colonization. And it's so important for us to recognize that, as you said, I work in a lot of different intersections. I'm Chicana, so a lot of my work is at the intersections of migrant justice, indigenous rights, and climate justice. And there's a lot of our young people that are getting lost in Mexico. There's a lot of young people that feel ashamed. There's still a lot of anti-indigeneity around it. So it's important for us to work to rescue our traditions, to wear our clothes, to be made visible, regardless of how much, we've been shamed out of, looking a certain way and being and acting a certain way. And I think that's so important for young people to not feel ashamed to walk in the way. And like one of the panelists before said, to be practitioners of our cultures, not just knowing what we used to know and how grandma used to pray and how grandma used to pray by the water, but being those young grandmothers, because I know that every young person on this panel is an elder in training, and it's important for us to embody that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neerya. It's always a joy and a treat to hear you. You are such an amazing, inspiring soul. And congratulations for being the young champion of UNEP. And as you rightly said, emphasizing it, healing is central for liberation, and also emphasizing on how we also need to be practitioners because we will be the upcoming grandmas. And this is really, really very important because as you rightly said that it has to be intersectionality. So thank you, Neerya, for sharing your inputs. And now I would bring in all my participants' thought about what they think and what is the tool, technique, and resource which should be, which is important for empowering and amplifying the voices of Indigenous young people. So I would request our team to share the screen and so that we can see the results of all our participants. Wow. So in one word, what are the specific tools and resources? So we see funding is kind of leading and, prompting and highlighting, which I strongly feel it is. Funding has to be core and is core for young leadership. And apart from that, opportunities, yes, opportunity is very important. And when we're talking about opportunities, it's also accessibility, as we spoke in the first group of our speakers. And yes, leadership, enabling leadership, capacity building. And then I see respect. So true. Respect, space, training, trust. There you go, trust. And I'm just so happy that whatever our speaker said is being resonated with all our participants, those who are there. And at the same time, I also see communication, very important. Communication, as also Kwana was sharing, how important it is, and how we have been engaging in sharing our thoughts. And yes, so I feel this sharing which has come from all our participants. I would like to thank them for sharing their inputs and sharing the perspective, because I think all in all, whatever has been shared, training, respect, funding, space, communication, opportunity, identifying capacities, all this is very important. And this is what we have been discussing today all throughout our session, in the first group of session and also in the second group of interaction in this intergenerational dialogue at Global Youth Summit of IUCN. So thank you, participants, for sharing this. So moving on to the next session, I would like to interact, and I would like to reach out to our speakers on, one of the core important thing which our participants shared was communication, leadership, and funding, and respect and trust. So let's move on and also reflect in this interaction that how we can revitalize indigenous perspectives, and how we can revitalize the indigenous traditional knowledge. So I would like to hear a reflection from Niria and Kwana on the words which is being shared by the participant, and which we just saw in our screen. So Niria and Kwana, would you like to share your reflection on what participants had shared?
Yeah. I would just like to say that I feel so strongly towards a lot of those words that were put up on the screen, because when we talk about, uplifting each other, especially Indigenous people, there has to be respect, because every Indigenous person, every tribe has their way of life, and people need to understand that and respect that. And so that's like a big thing for me, is respect. I was raised to always respect my elders, and to listen and make sure that I've always, had not just respect, but love and kindness towards others that don't understand, because it's not their fault, but it is our job to make sure that they get some sort of education through the growth of the society we're in.
Thank you for sharing. This is Nidia speaking. I would say my reflections on what was shared is I saw a word come up around trusting young people. And I think that is so important because, there's a lot of elders that are coming through as children in this time. And I deeply, deeply believe that those of us that are coming through to be on Mother Earth are being sent by the Creator and by our ancestors to really play our role and do our part. And that's all we have to do as young people, is just take the next step. We're on the shoulders of so many elders that have struggled and given their life for us to get to this point. And so to all to the elders and olders, just trust that as young people, we know we have a piece to contribute. And what a colleague said earlier was around how sometimes elders do hold on a little bit too long, and that's hard because it impedes us from stepping into our leadership and even from learning from our own failures, like everyone does. And the second one is everyone has their role. I saw a word that came up on there around funding. Everybody, if you got money, find somebody in the struggle with the boots on the ground, and that's your role to play, is to just give folks money. And yeah, collaboration, respect, and working together, that's how we're going to get through this together.
Thank you so much, Kuana and Niria, for your reflection on the words shared by our participant. That was truly, truly, truly very important and empowering and encouraging for all of us. So moving on to our next segment of today's interaction, I would like to bring in Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and would like to ask him and would like to hear from him that now GEF has worked to recognize and support Indigenous people across. So would like to hear from him that what GEF especially doing to strengthen and support the youth, Indigenous youth specifically. And today at this Global Youth Summit of IUCN, we would like to hear from you what GEF would like to commit to all the youth today listening to you.
Muchas gracias, Archana. I will be delighted to be able to talk on that, but give me just 30 seconds to react to the previous panel. I was inspired and touched by the interventions of your colleagues in the previous panel. We tend to believe that we have done relatively progress in the redemption of minorities and rights in the last many years, because there's a lot of strategies and safeguards and documents at the country level, at the subnational level, within us, the multilateral organization. But the level of frustration and even anger is evident. Yesterday, as an example, I had at the GFA an internal meeting on racism and discrimination. And even though the GF Secretariat, 95% of people are from developing nations, there's a high perception that we deal on a daily basis with discrimination and racism. And this is to say that we're just beginning to really understand the complex but very positive dimension of full respect to human rights, full respect to minorities, and deal with racism and discrimination, not just as something parallel to the main, as having good safeguards, rather than embedded in our own personal DNA, in our own in our societies and where we work. So thank you for the putting together the first panel. I'm turning 61 this week, but I'm still a very young guy in my inside. I still treasure my days in the preparation of Rio 92 and how we were fighting the older generation and the system. I felt, in 92, I felt very, very much that the older generation compromised my future. And that feeling hasn't changed at all with the youth, particularly nowadays with the loss of our natural ecosystems and climate change. The space for the youth is needed. And yes, my generation, unfortunately, has compromised the future of your generation. So we need to, keep together, and based on values and principle, we can change the system. I truly believe we can change the system. We're changing the system little by little, but now we need to accelerate as we all focus on the big actions that are needed. So going to your question, GF has been working with indigenous community for many years and farmers and local communities without even recognizing it at the highest political level. And the best example is the small grant program. The small grant program has been working on the field for many, many years, but we haven't been able to really recognize and even mainstream and upscale the very positive things that we've been doing there. So that is something that I want to really amplify, as there are so many learned lessons on how we've been working through the small grant program. Nevertheless, here, the big challenge for the GF is precisely how do we support the many different issues related to indigenous communities in our main portfolio. And even though we got a good set of safeguards and advisory advice from indigenous communities, so we won't affect the rights of indigenous communities, this is the minimum that we should be doing. And as we look forward into the future, particularly based on the fact that we need to achieve, progress on reverting the rate of nature loss by 2030. We need to become nature positive by 2030. We need to decrease 45% of emissions by 2030. And we need to adapt and become more resilient, not just to climate change and pandemics. And the way to do it is not just through governments. Even though the GEF works on a government base, a donor and a recipient, more and more there is willingness and openness for fully engaging civil societies in the solutions, and being convinced of the need and the benefits of working strategically with civil society. I will be doing my best to open the possibilities to engage more systematically, more long-term with civil society. And here is where indigenous communities and local indigenous groups and local communities are key and important. I put a lot of attention on the DGM mechanism, the dedicated mechanism that is within the FIP, within the climate investment programs run by Conservation International. That's a wonderful, wonderful mechanism, but this is basically on forest mitigation and the role of the local communities in forest mitigation. We got a great mechanism there that should be mainstream in everything we do, because deforestation and the possibility to engage local communities, indigenous communities in climate mitigation is not enough. We need to get into adaptation, resilience, and bring a lot of the chemicals agenda and the pollutions agenda into this. So the GF looks with a lot of attention to these dedicated financial mechanisms designed by indigenous communities, implemented by CI as a good example of something that we need to bring up across the whole spectrum of climate, environmental funding. And this is relevant in the context of the incoming GEF 8 replenishment. So thank you so much for the possibility to share some ideas with you all.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was really very inspiring and giving a different perspective as to how do we take indigenous people's participation. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank Neria for joining us amidst her tight schedule, and she's about to leave us. So thank you, Neria, for joining us. Really sending you a lot of wishes. The last very few words, Neria, if you'd like to, just before you leave.
Thank you so much, sis. Yeah, I think my last words would just be to stay connected to your culture, reconnect to your culture. We are living not only in a time of great climate crisis, but we're also witnessing a massive spiritual crisis. And we know that all of this destruction is because of that deep disconnection. You know, when the colonizers came, the first thing they came after was the sacred. They destroyed the sacred. They hurt the women. So as women, we need, and two-spirit people, we need to keep our spirit strong and stay connected to our life ways. And that's how we will carry on through this time into a better time, hopefully. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Neria. So moving on to our next speakers. So I would like to bring in Kristen Walker. And Kristen, we would like to hear from you, like what is CEESP is doing specifically in terms of strengthening and supporting Indigenous youth specifically. and would like to hear from you, like what commitment would you be doing today for the Indigenous youth as to strengthen and empower them, and we would like to hear from you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists. This has been very inspiring. I have to say, as a mother of two youth who have their feet in both worlds, that of my husband, who is Mapuche from southern Chile, and that of my own, coming from the Western society. In my own household, we strike a balance of looking at these issues. So that I put forth in the work that I do in the conservation community with IUCN, but also with Conservation International. But I too am working to give them and support them in their voice as they look for it, connecting with their cultures and driving that. In terms of the commission, I think the Commission on Environment, Economics and Social Policy of IUCN has tended to be the rebel rousers within the IUCN commissions, and have helped to push the diversity of voices across the conservation community, elevating and supporting dialogue and discussion on rights, Indigenous peoples, women's issues. How do we look at economics? And I think the Commission will continue to do that. And as part of it is, I think the Commission will provide an open space, but we will also get out of the way to provide that support to youth to develop their own strategy of how they would like to engage more broadly with IUCN in the context of this. We have Ramiro Batsin here who will speak after me, but I think what we have done a lot is worked with the Indigenous Peoples Organization members of IUCN as their membership has become and developed their strategy and helped to support their strategy. I think we would also work together with the Indigenous members of IUCN to help support the connection of Indigenous voices and bringing that to the forefront collectively. And the Commission is also open to having an Indigenous leader on the leadership of the steering committee of the Commission to continue to bring that voice from initiatives to platforms and so forth. So we are here, we are open, and please feel free to reach out to me within the context of the Commission. I know we're running short on time, but please know that this commitment comes from the heart. As I bring my own children along on this journey, and they have participated in this summit throughout the week. But the door is open, and we would love to be on this journey with you all and support that for the next generation. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. We really appreciate your remarks on specifically sharing, allow the Indigenous young people to create their own strategy. So we need your support and solidarity, because this is really, really very important to enable to create own strategy based on their own learning and geographical location and tradition and culture. So thank you so much. So moving on to Mr. Ramiro. We would like to hear from Mr. Ramiro. What is IUCN doing specifically to strengthen and support the Indigenous youth? Today at this Global Youth Summit of IUCN and this intergenerational dialogue on Indigenous people, what would be your commitment today for Indigenous youth?
Ok. Bueno, gracias. Una pregunta bastante compleja, porque nuestra unión pues es una de las organizaciones más grandes a nivel mundial, y entonces mover a la unión es complejo, pero también es muy importante, digamos. Primero quiero partir expresando que nuestra unión tiene el reto de ser una de las primeras organizaciones que creen las condiciones para una participación plena y efectiva de los jóvenes indígenas en los niveles territoriales, nacionales e internacionales. Es fundamental amarrar, y nosotros siempre hemos planteado que hay que traer la agenda internacional al nivel local, porque es ahí donde se dan las acciones. Como ICN, tenemos que operativizar lo que plantea nuestro programa 21-24, el cual expresa: hay mucho que reconocer y aprender de los conocimientos y las prácticas de los pueblos indígenas. Por eso es imperativo que se reconozcan y apliquen los derechos y se respeten los conocimientos tradicionales. Para ello, los jóvenes deben ser un motivo de optimismo. Eso está planteado, digamos, dentro de nuestro documento de programa 2021. También plantea que la OICN participará activamente e invertirá en la juventud y en las asociaciones intergeneracionales para fomentar las nuevas generaciones de líderes de la conservación. Para empoderar a los jóvenes en la conservación, la UICN mejorará su alcance a los jóvenes para que las asociaciones intergeneracionales se conviertan en una realidad cotidiana en el trabajo de la Unión. La UICN trabajará en todos los frentes, incluyendo la educación, el compromiso, la activación y la comunicación para fomentar el intercambio de conocimientos intergeneracionales, mejorar la participación significativa de los jóvenes en el trabajo de la UICN, aumentar la participación de los jóvenes en la promoción de las políticas y programas. Y nuestro plan 2021 que está por salir plantea que se tiene que trabajar con los pueblos indígenas, las mujeres y los jóvenes para impulsar su participación activa en la gobernanza y en la toma de decisiones. Esto es algo, digamos, que tenemos institucionalizado dentro de los planes y es importante, y llamo a los jóvenes que tenemos que revisar esos documentos y tenemos, como nosotros decimos en Guatemala, tenemos que echarlo a andar, porque si no también se queda solo en papeles. ¿En qué me comprometo? Sí, yo creo que este es un reto grande, digamos, y un compromiso para con ustedes. A nivel territorial, continuar desarrollando acciones que permitan el desarrollo integral con identidad de los jóvenes indígenas. Es importantísimo promover acciones territoriales que les dé a los jóvenes el empoderamiento. A nivel nacional, promover cambios en las políticas, legislaciones que reconozcan el aporte, conocimiento y derecho de los jóvenes indígenas. Es importante que en estos momentos ya hablemos, ya digamos que los jóvenes son el presente. Siempre hemos dicho los jóvenes son el futuro. No, en sus manos está el planeta, en sus manos están nuestras vidas. Y a nivel internacional, específicamente en lo que estamos hoy, difundir y apoyar con el cumplimiento de la declaración de resultados de la primera Cumbre Mundial de la Juventud de la UICN. Yo me siento honrado que haya sido invitado a participar con ustedes y me comprometo a promover que los resultados que broten para que se hagan realidad. Hay que seguir respaldando, sí, las propuestas de la juventud indígena de esta cumbre. Llamo a todos los miembros del Consejo a fortalecer. De hecho, hay una discusión fuerte dentro del Consejo, cómo va a ser el papel de los jóvenes. Los jóvenes deben de estar ya en los diferentes espacios de la UICN. Deben de haber jóvenes en el Consejo. Deben de haber jóvenes en el secretariado. Deben de haber jóvenes en los comités regionales, en los comités nacionales y a nivel territorial. La UICN, por así decirlo, tiene que estar lleno de esa juventud. Algunos de nosotros todavía tenemos juventud acumulada, pero es necesario traer esos nuevos liderazgos, esos liderazgos que ya están. Entonces, yo realmente quiero felicitarlos y exhortarlos a que sigan adelante y que la madre naturaleza está en sus manos. El cambio del planeta, el cambio del modelo de desarrollo, como lo decía nuestro hermano Carlos Manuel, ¿sí? Está en ustedes. Y como dice Cristi, hay que hacer los cambios desde adentro. Sí, hay que hacer los cambios desde la familia, hay que hacer los cambios desde la comunidad, desde lo nacional, lo internacional. Realmente tiene que haber un cambio. Yo creo que ya los que hemos venido transitando por estos espacios, debemos de promover esos espacios de la juventud y tiene que ser en la práctica. Así que adelante y Mateo Chivé. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Ramiro, for your commitments. And as you rightly said, as I would like to echo it, we youth are the future. We youth are the present and not the future. We have to work for our conservation, for our nature, and for our world now, and we are working on it. And as you rightly said, I would also like to say that when we are talking about youth engagement or indigenous youth participation, it is very important that we really need to move beyond meaningful youth engagement to meaningful youth leadership. Leadership is what we see, and leadership is what we seek, and being able to access the decision making spaces. So thank you so much, Carlos, Mr. Ramiro, and Kristen, for your commitments. I would like to go back to Kuana, and we have question for Kuana from the audience. So how can Indigenous youth around the world connect in the struggle for conservation of nature and work together? Kuana.
I love that question. Um, Personally, I love to do as much community work as possible, and just reach out to youth in your own community and see if they're interested in the same things you're interested, if it's climate work, um, or just helping out your elders or something, and if you want to become more involved and you want to work together more, then just start opening up conversations with each other and start building connections and spend time out on the land with each other, because that's where you really start seeing and feeling where that passion comes from, where that drive comes from. And so that's what I do. I love to meet with my friends, other Indigenous youth, even virtually, and just, have these conversations, be open-minded. And yeah, that's just.
Thank you so much, Kuana, for rightly saying it. It's all about going and reaching out to people, building connection, sharing. And, sometimes I feel that, I have not met Kuana, but I still feel a strong bond with her in this first meeting over Zoom itself. So it's that, the young people's interaction and connection is so powerful that, it's not about meeting physically, but it's also about the intent and how we want to work. And that is what is very important in terms of connection and in terms of network building and in terms of working together and leaving no one behind. So today, now we have come towards the end of our intergenerational dialogue in supporting and valuing Indigenous people, the role of youth. And it gives me an immense pleasure today to have moderated this session. So, summing up today's interaction, what I strongly feel is that the key important points which has come across in this interaction, both in the group one and both in the group two, is about recognizing the rights of the Indigenous people and local communities over the land and territories. Uh, Second is respecting the worldviews of the Indigenous peoples, their traditional knowledge and identity. Third, which is very important, which has come up, is to protect the Indigenous people and to support the Indigenous people, enable their participation in the climate action discourse and in the conservation. The fourth, which has come up, is like how important it is to identify the challenges faced by the young people and Indigenous people, and how important is to support in the economic growth and also to build a sustainable livelihood initiatives. And at the same time, what the fifth point which I would feel to emphasize is it has come with more of spirituality and more of spiritually how connected we are with nature. It's more about, when we say protecting nature, it's like we are nature, and it is important to ensure that our relationship with nature, it needs to be revived and needs to be strengthened. At the same time, how also we also shared, that the imposition of the worldview has been there, and which has led to breaking down of the spiritualities with this entire challenges and extractive developmental which has come up, and how important it is to revive and rejuvenate our relationship with nature. So, key takeaways and the final message which I would like to say about when we are talking about supporting and valuing the Indigenous people. So it is about protection of Indigenous people. It is about recognizing the rights of Indigenous people. And it is with taking Indigenous people together and making them part of the decision-making process. So here it is. And it's an honor for me to listen wonderful voices of Indigenous leaders across, and being the member of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. It was amazing learning to hear your voices, and we will take this message and insights and inputs to Secretary General and would be briefing him on the discussion which we had. And I would like to share with all the participants, please feel free to reach out to us. We will be keen in interacting with you and ensuring and amplifying the Indigenous perspective in terms of climate action and conservation efforts. So here it is. It has been a roller coaster of emotions altogether today, from being happy, super happy, to emotional, to learning, inspiring. It has been an amazing journey. So thank you, everyone. A special thanks to all the speakers. I do understand you all are from different time zones, different geographical location, yet you have made out time to attend this session. So I would like to thank each and every one for joining us. So here I'll be signing off for today's intergenerational dialogue, and it has been a super amazing experience for my life, and which I'll cherish forever. So thank you so much, everyone. And I would now request Tasha to take over from here. Thank you.